Welcome, Kristin. Thank you so much for being a guest on Well Actually. And I have to ask you, just
Mm,
straight off the bat, are
mm.
you well actually?
I love it. I think I'm in a really sweet spot right now. I think of wellness from a holistic perspective. Um, am I well in body? Am I well in mind? Am I well in spirit? And obviously, they all coexist. And to be well, I think is you really become an alchemist. It's like a
Mm.
looking at those three portals of your life and how do I balance them all so that I'm not overly focused in body, overly focused in mind, overly focused on spirit, so that I can um you know just be in a really balanced space where, and balance isn't a fixed point, it's not a noun, it's a bit of a moving target.
Mm.
So um I think I've gotten to, at the ripe age of 52, I think I've gotten a much more of a handle on what my needs are and how to tend to those needs. Um, where I think when I was younger, I was certainly looking for those outward reflections of like, am I okay? And
Totally.
now for me, it's about, I've really actually only in the last part of my, even though I love physical activity, um, I'm really getting connected to how I'm actually feeling, because I think I overrode my feelings a lot. So that's kind of a new territory that I've been diving into. Um, so just like yoga, the word yoga or union, or to bring together, what we're looking for, I think, in wellness is bringing all of our parts together to make whole.
Hmm.
And because we live in a world of duality, to know wellness means I also know what unwellness feels and looks like. The
Hmm.
only way I can know whether I'm well or not is to know how I've been unwell in the past. So I think, yeah, I'm well, actually.
I love
Actually well.
that. Actually, well, actually for
Actually well, like for
real.
real. Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
again, like it's a moving target. So I can't control what's happening in the world beyond me, but all I can do is take care of me.
Hmm.
And um and I know what I need to do in order to feel that sense of ease and flow and being
Hmm.
okay with
And you
myself.
and you mentioned the kind of three, like the parts of you that you alchemized into wellness. And you said that in the past you'd maybe put more of a priority on one of the parts and at the expense of the others. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to this place now where you've come to this realization of what wellness is?
Mm, okay. Um, yeah, okay. I think, I was born to teenage parents. My mom was 50 and my dad was 18.
Okay.
Um, I lived with my dad's family until I was 1.5, and then my parents took me on. And they're trying to figure out their own lives. And from a very young age, I really felt on my own.
So,
And I had to orient myself in the world, in the big world. I was living in the big city of Toronto until I was about 10 years old. And then I moved to a very remote little tiny island in the west coast of British Columbia. But while in the early years in Toronto, I was like getting around on public transit by myself at a very young age. And I had to be responsible for myself at a very young age. And at that age, of course, I didn't know that I had the power of choice. I just had to adapt.
mm,
And that, it taught me how to be resilient. So I think I've been able to orient to this place of inner knowing.
mm-hmm,
I'm very much an internal processor. So I tend to be like, okay, what do I need to do to just like survive?
mm-hmm,
And so I've always had that part of me. And then there's the part of me that has also, on the other side of that coin, am I am I okay? Like I'm feel like I'm very much alone. And is that because I'm not lovable or not enough? So I would say that, I was straddling both, and I can still straddle both parts of me.
Mm,
Um, and Yeah, like I think even when I got really into yoga, and at that time, well, I was doing hatha yoga, and then I got introduced to Bikram yoga, and that just really like took me.
mm,
And I became super addicted to Bikram yoga because I felt the benefits of having what it meant to have a calm mind,
mm,
and to feel successful
mm,
in terms of my physicality. Um, and so there was a lot of wonderful benefits to doing a regular Bikram practice. Yet on the other side, it could tip over to, oh my God, I didn't get 6 practices in this week. Oh my God, I fell out of dancer's pose. What do I make that mean? I'm not enough. I got to go harder, deeper.
mhm.
So yeah, I think that we're often straddling both sides of the coin. It's like
Yeah.
wellness and unwellness are two sides of the same coin. And so what is that right alchemy? It's like going to yoga every day is amazing, but when I'm declining a offer to go to Thailand with my friends on their buddy passes, and I'm too afraid to go because what's going to happen if my yoga practice is getting disrupted? That's maybe unhealthy,
Yeah,
unhealthy
yeah,
wellness.
yeah.
So of course it's a journey, right? And I think that yoga is a beautiful path for self-discovery, and you really get to see and know yourself. And I think one of the profound benefits for me with doing Bikram yoga was the mirror, and being able to like visually see myself. And the one of the first I might be going off piece a little bit here and
No,
all over the
no,
map,
no,
but
no, I'm loving it.
I think it adds to the conversation. One of the biggest, I'd say the biggest hurdle for me when I first started that practice was having to face myself in the mirror for 90 minutes, and at first I was like constantly looking away, and I was like, okay, what's up? I can't even face myself for 90 minutes. How can I face the world?
Mm,
And it wasn't the heat, it wasn't the poses, it was the first thing I really had to lean into. And from that, I noticed that the world beyond me was reflecting back to me. Oh, what have you been up to lately? You seem a lot more confident. You're
mm,
standing tall, like just even the way I was embodying myself with more confidence, being able to actually maintain eye contact without my eyes darting all over the place.
mm,
Those were pivotal shifts for me. And it wasn't until I really heard that reflection from people around me, even strangers,
mm,
um, or not strangers, but people that I'd see like in a shop on the regular, but I didn't really know them, but they would comment, right? I'm like, oh, okay, the only thing that I've changed is doing this yoga, and it must be working. So the mirror, back to that svadhyaya, the self study,
mhm,
the literal mirror for me was a way to notice, oh, how do I beat myself up? How do I speak to myself? How do I project on the person around me that I fell out of a pose? So I'm going to blame the person in front of me for like them teetering and then just being like, wait a minute, you're doing it again. Put your judgment on a leash and be self-responsible and self-referencing.
mm.
So that practice really taught me how to see my shit because it was all over the mirror, and also like be like, hey, that's mine to take care of. It's not has nothing to do with the teacher's voice or whether my mat has a crinkle in it or whether it's too hot or what have you. So thankfully I had that I guess what's the word, initiation into self-study,
Yeah.
and it really really helped. And now I can just take that, the self-study aspect of the mirror, into like my yoga mat is my mirror, my relationships are my mirror, where am I out of, when and where and how am I out of alignment? So um, I guess it's just been this ongoing unraveling since a young age. And it just keeps getting more and more
Mm.
interesting. And I think even me saying the word interesting at that time, like I guess I started doing Bikram yoga in my later 20s.
Yeah.
I I was the journey was very much like, oh, I need to fix this, I need to change this, I need to transform this. Where
Hmm.
now my language is more like, oh, that's interesting that that part of me is coming up again. Ooh, I guess I need to tend to that part. I'm never going to get rid of the lower tendencies.
Mm.
But what I'm learning to do is love myself anyways, love myself through it, and almost be amused by those little parts that
Yes.
come up, like, oh, there she is again, and love her anyways. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the mirror thing actually, because I guess for anyone who's not familiar with Bikram yoga, it's kind of an anomaly to other yoga styles in that it uses mirrors, or it advocates for the use of mirrors.
Yeah.
And initially, because I remember going to some Bikram classes when I was a new practitioner, and I was kind of, like you said, I was quite put off by them. I didn't want to look at myself. And then
Right.
I kind of got freaked out by people eyeballing themselves the whole way through. And because I didn't kind of think that hard about what the mirrors were for, I thought, oh, maybe it's just to help people with their alignment physically. But also, it's, as you say, it's that mirror. And that's deliberate, right? Then it's meant to have that psychological element, Bikram yoga, in with the mirror.
I think so. And like that's been my takeaway. I mean, sure, at first it was, you can, just like yoga, you can use it for good or for evil, right? It's both poisonous and medicinal, depending on how you use it. So the mirror, I could be walking and be like, I'll only ever see it as for vanity, checking myself out. Am I okay?
Mm.
Um, so there's days certainly or moments throughout a class where perhaps I slip into vanity, or, checking myself out. Am I okay? Do I need to fix my hair? And then other times I'm like, oh, I'm doing that again. Okay. Like, how about today? You just let your hair be as it is. So I think that, you know, also it is really helpful to see your alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both are helpful. It's helpful to see your alignment from an outer perspective, and it's also because you can't see your blind spots. Um, and it's also helpful to feel like there's pros and cons to any
Mm.
practicing with a mirror, without a mirror.
And what you teach now and what you train other teachers in, would you call that Bikram, or would you call it, you call it Tapasya, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
How does that, I mean, I know because obviously I trained with you, but could you tell us how Tapasya differs from Bikram?
Sure. Um, so tapasya means to have the willingness to endure intensity for the sake of transformation.
Mm.
Um, so I used to have a studio in Whistler, the ski resort town of Whistler in British Columbia, just about an hour and a half outside of Vancouver.
Mhm.
And we opened as a Bikram studio. And then my partner at the time, Patrick Krillman, and I started to study other styles and modalities of yoga. And through that, I realized that there was benefit to moving my body in different ways and different approaches. And actually, at the time, I was um, experiencing a lot of injury in my body, self injury. And again, that goes back to kind of beating myself up on the mat, not being enough, pushing harder. And also at the time, the culture at Bikram was, you heard a lot, go back, fall back, way back until your back hurts like hell. It's supposed to, and go to your like a lot of pushing towards your edge, which I think can be beneficial. People often don't want to get uncomfortable, but to me, like where are your those boundaries that we have in terms of our physical limitations or mental limitations, are they like there to protect in a good way, or are they there to keep you small? So there's
Mm.
benefit to having, like, to explore the edges. However, when my approach at that time was very much, I'm not enough, so I'm going to really strive for more. And having done a regular practice for years, 6 classes a week times how many days a month times how many times a year, and they're the same poses, your edge gets further and further. And I didn't really understand the balance at that time between sthira and sukham, the sweetness and the stability and freedom, or hard and soft, and healthy boundaries in my practice. So I almost had to go to the end, swing the pendulum all the way over to a fierce approach, which is what I had at the time, to realize like that's too much. And so Patrick had met John Friend, who created the Anusara system of yoga and brought back a teacher training manual. And I learned the 5 principles of alignment, and I started applying them to how I was practicing power yoga and Bikram yoga. And I was like, ooh, the niggles in my body that I was experiencing are beginning to cease. And it completely changed. And what really changed for me with Anusara was considering the why in your intention while opening to grace, the first principle, before engaging in the practice. Where Bikram, it was like, come in, put your toes, heels together, let's go. And you're just flung into it, right? And I didn't have the I guess, maturity and knowledge at the time that, wait a second, like, why am I actually here? The why informs how things are going to play out. And so I started to incorporate more intention setting and theming my classes and asking some of the deeper questions. And so how I was teaching Bikram was evolving. And I really loved the structural framework of the Bikram practice, because I think that, children thrive with structure and routine. We're big children, so do we. And I think even when I was kind of starting to consider creating a different methodology of hot yoga, because that's essentially what I was teaching in Bikram, in my little mountain studio away from the world, where I could kind of do that, I was starting to ask, like, is this a truly, even though I'm teaching the Bikram poses in the same sequence, 26 and 2, is this still considered Bikram yoga? And I was getting a lot of people asking me at the time if I would teach them how to teach. And they didn't want to spend the 12,000 US or whatever it was at the time to go to teacher training. And so I sat with it for quite a long time, and then came up with my own thing, which is now I call Tapasya. So the similarities are that there is, say, 90% of the class has the structure, and then the other 10%, the teacher gets to add in their own, whether it's through a theme or how you open the class and how you close the class after camel pose being like the final kind of peakier back bend. So there's the sthira, the structure, the container, where there's a deliberate logical order. And we live in a world with so much uncertainty. I think it's beneficial to have a structured practice where you have, what's coming, and you can use that repetition. Some people will say, well, I get bored, I get stuck. Well, you know what? It's not the practice that's boring. It's you, actually. So it's you, actually, because I think that these poses are like portals of possibility. There's so much that we can engage with in these shapes, that when you start to go on autopilot, it's like, okay, like, it's up to the practitioner to be self-responsible and be like, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm thinking about my grocery list. Like, how fancy is meditation? It's not, in my opinion. And like, the way I've been taught is our asana practice is meant to support being able to sit for long periods of time without distraction and being free in the joints and however. So I think the structure is really important. There is some variation. For example, if you're doing the warrior sequence, you might choose different arm variations. So there is some room for creativity within the structure. But then it always comes back to, but why? Why do you feel like you have to take a different arm variation? Why do you feel like you need to change it up? Is it like you feeling like what you're offering as a teacher isn't enough and your students are getting bored? Or, I mean, I hear that a lot from teachers of this system. And um, I mean, it's multi-layered, isn't it?
Mm.
More often the students are like, no, 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 I come because I can count on the practice. It's where I can like switch my mind off and just follow along, and it becomes very meditative.
Totally.
Whereas when you're changing it up, people are like, what's this? This isn't where that's supposed to go. So
Yeah.
um, I primarily teach hatha vinyasa actually, and that's where I can get more creative and change things up, and
Mm.
decide, you know what, we're going to workshop this today. I'm going to scratch that and just focus on opening the shoulders and
Mm.
what have you. So I use this system of Tapasya to come back to the basics. It's very accessible. It's a wrist-like practice. It's very
Is.
foundational. You do a lot of the classical poses, nothing fancy. The transitions are very um, simple. Tadasana is the home pose.
Mm.
Um, yeah, you take the body into the different planes of movement in terms of like frontal plane movement, flexion and extension. We do rotation in the transverse plane. We do a lot of abduction, adduction. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I as same as you, I teach a combination. I just teach your hot, but I also teach my own vinyasa, and it's really knowing your sequence has really grounded how I teach vinyasa. And yeah, it's that thing of like I don't need to change this up quite so much. And actually, I've noticed, especially now when things are so uncertain, people almost like even more than ever they want that simplicity. Like
Mm.
I was teaching a private one of my one-on-one clients the other day, and she asked for something a bit different, and after we did it she was like, nah, actually I want to go back to the I just want to
Interesting.
go back to what we know.
Right. Like you think you want it, right? And then you like actually
Yeah.
no. And I think that we're so a lot of us are walking around as talking heads, right? We're so up in the mind
Yeah.
that this practice really gets you into the body. And I find the heat is such a key part of it as well, because within the intensity of the heated environment, it's in that intensity that you have to be grounded. You have to connect to your breath. You have to move slowly and deliberately, because if you're frenetic, um,
Mm.
your energy, your energy will burn up. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's interesting. Like I'm learning how to be a sauna attendant, but I've always been one to like create this beautiful hot bath, get into it for 3 minutes and be like, I'm done. So it's amazing that I've even been a hot yogi for as long as I have been,
Yeah.
because same thing, sunshine. I'm like in it for 5 minutes and then I'm good. Um, but what I've gleaned from it is just that it's very grounding. I learned how to regulate my nervous system,
Mm.
regulate my breath, attune to my breath, let the breath begin, the movement follow. So even though I come out looking like a sweaty beast, all wrung out and just like reset, I
Yeah.
feel so grounded,
Me
so
too.
grounded. Whereas sometimes, I've been going to a studio recently in the city, and there's music blaring. There's like an emphasis on like the strong breath and like quick moving. And so many vinyasa, and I end up feeling like, so at the end of it, I feel it's kind of exciting because I do like to get my butt kicked, but I mean, I do, but end up feeling a bit like frazzled after.
Totally.
And that's not the point, in my opinion,
Hmm. It,
right?
yeah, that I think that's what's so cool about hot yoga is that I think people who've never done it think, oh, that's a bit intense because it's hot. But because of the structure of the sequence and the way it's laid out, once you get used to the heat and as you say, your body's self-regulating in the moment, it becomes really grounding, and the feeling after is very relaxing. And you've also sweated stuff out, and it has really it has a lot of benefits for the joints as well, right? Like if you're
Oh
working with
yeah.
an injury, you can kind of rehab an injury almost through hot yoga. Is that correct? Am I
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So like it increase of blood flow, circulation.
Mm,
Um, there's a lot of poses where, we're creating a squeeze and release, like a tourniquet effect, it's called, on the joint. So you're creating a squeeze, and then as you release the pose, the joint gets synovial joints get flooded
yeah.
with oxygen. They say oxygenated blood and circulation. So it
Mm,
just helps to decalcify the joints, right? It gets you more freely moving.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, increased blood flow, and helping to remove stagnation. Like a lot of people have sedentary lives where, they're sitting, and like for example, my mom and I used to be the same height. She's had a desk job since she was youngin',
Mm,
and she's about 4 inches shorter than me now. She
yeah.
does have scoliosis, so that's part of it. But think of all that compression and how the organs become quite stagnant. And so through in the way that the practice is sequence right from the get-go. When you're doing that first pranayama, sweeping the arms up, you're creating an elongation to the spine to prepare you for the bigger body poses, the more complex postures, but
Mm,
also to create space and room in your body for the organs, um,
yeah.
to not be so compressed and perhaps stagnant, to move energy. um, yeah. So therapeutic in that sense.
And is that, do you how often do you practice the sequence, or even parts of the sequence, or do you have a favorite bit that you'll choose if you're short on time to practice on the regular?
I often will, right now I'm only teaching one class a week, and it's a slow flow.
Mm,
And but I often will take segments out of the hot practice, because the way that I've sequenced it is in a way that like I put my externally rotated poses before my neutral poses because they're typically more accessible. For example, I'll do my warrior two shapes
mm,
before I do my warrior one or crescent pose shapes. Um, and so the way that I sequence, my kind of rules for sequencing apply in the hot sequence as well as the way that I sequence other classes. So, um, for example, I might do the whole spine strengthening series in my vinyasa class.
mm,
So yeah, it's kind of the backbone really of the way,
mm.
and the sequence is completely different to the way that the Bikram. So a lot of the poses are the same, but the way that I've placed them
Yeah,
in the classy sequences, they're in
yeah,
completely different spots.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
And do you fit that sequence into your own kind of regular movement, like just your personal practice?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sure,
And
yeah.
and do you have, like, could you tell us maybe your some of your kind of non-negotiable things you do either on a daily basis or on a regular basis to keep you in that state of wellness?
Yeah. So on a daily basis, I get up quite early. So during the week, it's 5 a.m. On the weekend, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's this morning it was 5:30.
Oh,
Um, and the first thing I do is I come downstairs. I don't turn my airplane mode off of my phone. Sometimes I need my computer or device if I want to listen to an audio recording of a meditation, or
mm, mm,
um, I'm looking for, but I have boundaries around when I start working. Um, so it all, and again, balance is a moving target. So depending if I like to go to the gym usually 4 times a week. And so I'm at the gym at 6 a.m. So my morning practice might be a little bit shorter on those days. On days where I'm not going to the gym, I'll spend more time, and it could look like meditation. It could look like journaling. I've been doing a lot of journaling this last year,
me too.
um, and self inquiry, contemplative practices. Um, what else? Breath work is always kind of in that, wrapped up in that. Um, yeah.
Mm. The morning, I'm also an early morning person, even on days when I don't have to get up, and it's the best time. I mean, for me
Love
anyway,
it.
it's the best time because then you got your day. And you also have your own brand of water kefir. Um, could you tell us a little bit about that and its health benefits?
Sure, yeah. So water kefir is it's brewed from a culture, a kefir culture. Some people are more familiar with the dairy kefir.
Yes.
Water kefir culture looks the same in its shape. It looks like little, almost like tapioca. I call them minions because they're like little happy blobs, and they work for us. um, and but it's the way that you feed the culture is different. So with water kefir, it ferments off of sugar,
Mhm.
and the culture eats up the sugar and then produces this beverage that's rich in probiotics and digestive enzymes.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so we actually just had our culture tested, our brew tested, and it has over 2 billion
Wow.
CFU, which means colony forming units of living bacteria. 2
Wow.
billion, over 2 billion
That's insane.
um,
So you're so that is
per
like gut joy.
gut joy. And
Gut.
it's living. So and that's per 355 mil can. That's how much is in there.
Wow.
Yeah. So um it's really, really great for gut health. We know that the majority of our neurotransmitters, the common ones being serotonin, 95% of your serotonin, which helps to regulate mood, um, is formed in the gut, as well as dopamine, that neurotransmitter that's associated with motivate you towards reward
Mm,
um, and pleasure. So 50% in the gut. The
mm.
gut is home to 70% of your immune cells.
Yes.
So I mean, it seems like it's in the mainstream now, isn't it? Like the importance of gut health and
Yeah.
how it can be related to stress, anxiety, depression, ADHD, um, mood disorders, digestion, elimination. Yeah,
Mm. And I
yeah,
guess it's because I've never actually tried water kefir. I've only ever had the dairy one. But I
yeah,
guess is water kefir like just a bit of a lighter thing to drink? Because sometimes when I
yeah.
have the dairy one, it's kind of filling, which is great. But if you're not really, if you just want a little, you
Little
know,
pick me up.
little pick
Yeah.
me up, I
So
don't want to glug a whole bottle of milk.
yeah, yeah. There are some brands in the UK. There's one called Pure, and then there's one called Agua Madre, I think it's called. And
Hmm.
um, I've seen whenever I go to Camden to teach, I always go into Whole Foods. I'm like, okay, what's happening now in this world? Because we've been in business now for 7.5 years, and we were the first to market in Western Canada at least. So it's still kind of like an emerging category.
Yeah.
I would say that water kefir is more similar to kombucha than it is to dairy kefir. So the main difference between, we often get asked this question, difference between kombucha and water kefir. Kombucha is a fermented tea.
Hmm.
Water kefir has no tea in it, therefore there's no caffeine in it. Not all kombuchas are brewed with a caffeinated tea, just to say.
Hmm.
Um, so so it doesn't carry that vinegary taste. It's
Mm.
much more light. It's like a soda where it just tastes like a natural soda, but it has benefits
Yeah,
to it.
loads of benefits.
Just
What
loads of benefits.
what inspired you to get into that?
Well, at the time, I was in 2010 when my daughter was born. I decided I didn't want to own a yoga studio anymore. So when I moved down to Squamish, I was thinking, okay, how can I was doing a lot of traveling to teach, and was thinking that I would create more of an online coaching platform to support the teachers that I meet, like yourself,
Mm.
who, that I'm not, I come there for a week, blast you with everything I know, and then I leave, and you don't have that
Yeah,
touchstone, right, to the source. So, but I realized, you know what, like sitting online and marketing myself and things like that just I wasn't feeling it.
totally.
So I was out on a run with my business partner, and we were just chit chatting, and she told me that she had sold 60 wine bottles full of water kefir just in her housing complex in this one weekend.
Wow.
towing her daughter around in a red wagon with all these bottles of kefir. And she also was looking at pivoting to a new career. So she was studying nutrition, exploring different things that she could make and sell at farmers markets. And she said, so I used to come from a film background before yoga,
Yeah.
and she had just come out of film. She knew what I knew what it was like to work those hours and be a mom. And so she was like, oh God, I sold 60 wine bottles, which is amazing, but how am I going to keep it all up? And so she said, do you want to be my partner? And my yes just leapt out of me before my
Oh,
mind
I
could
love
answer.
that.
And I was
That's
actually on the way to try yoga the next week to teach a training. And I said, let me just really think about what I said yes to. I'll be back. She said, well, should I sign up for this farmer's market this weekend? It was a rainy Sunday in September back in 2015, and she sold out within a couple of hours. So we knew that we were onto
wow.
something. And yeah,
Do
so
you
it's
ship
been a
to the
very,
UK?
no, not yet.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Let
we're
us know
just
when you
right
do.
now. I know it's kind of because it's a living product. It's a bit
Yeah,
tricky with shipping
because it will has to
and
stay
expensive.
refrigerated and all of that.
Has to stay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
won't.
but right
Well,
now
I
we're
won't try
looking
any
at,
other brands. I refuse.
yeah,
I
maybe
will
I can
wait.
smuggle some in my suitcase when I fly over in June.
Yeah, do. I want to lose my water kefir virginity to
Yeah,
squash.
with me. Okay.
Yeah, with you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate your loyalty.
and I guess it's probably quite complimentary when you're doing a lot of hot yoga, you're sweating a lot. I mean, obviously, got to drink water anyway, but you may as well boost your hydration with 2 billion live cultures.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's the thing though, like when you only drink, so I've done farmers markets where I'm just drinking water kefir all day. I'm
Yeah,
like, no, I start to feel dehydrated. So water is still very important.
of course, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Hmm.
just to like pivot a little bit the conversation, I'm curious to know if there's anything out there, maybe it's a trend in wellness or yeah, like let's call it a trend in wellness that you find to be actually more harmful than promoting of wellness. And if so, what would that thing be?
The first thing that comes to mind is I think there can be a lack of integration
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, like, I certainly fell into the trap of spiritual materialism when I was new. And I remember telling a senior yoga teacher, oh, I'm going to do this workshop and then I'm going to do this training. And he was like, wow, are you just collecting certificates? And I was just like, oh, huh. And that really kind of like rattled my bell, if you
Yeah.
will. And I was like, okay, so why do I feel the need to just collect more knowledge and do more things? And if I looked at all the notes that I've taken and all the workshops and trainings that I've done over the years, I could just keep re-educating myself over and over and over again, because I think it definitely takes time to integrate what you're learning and to actually have a lived experience with the knowledge, not just being able to regurgitate it verbally, but like how do those teachings live within you? How have you adapted these teachings into your life? How um are you living the practice in your when off the mat, or are you just living the practice when in the yoga practice or in the plant medicine journey? And because I do find, especially in that world, the plant medicine world, I'm seeing a lot of people just doing ceremony after ceremony after ceremony after ceremony without the integration piece. And it's not necessarily that they don't want to integrate. It's that maybe there isn't that support, like an accessible support there. And that can be a barrier of like resources. It can also be a financial barrier. I'm seeing these journeys, like the price tag on some of these journeys and then the integration afterwards. I mean, I don't know how people do it. And it just
Thousands
seems
and
like it's
thousands.
kind of reserved for more the elite, wealthier folks. And I find that to be quite unfortunate. That's just the way it is. So, or the way it can be. It's not always that, but yeah. So I think that there is a lack of integration, and it's just like take the next thing, do the next thing,
Mm.
and then there'll be enough.
Yeah, and I think it just if and that kind of that always like the need to do more and acquire more takes you away from the fact that you're already well. It's just sometimes you have to go in to find it rather than get the next thing to be shown it. Yeah, I remember when I would do a lot of trainings when I was newer, and I so many times I would hear things in trainings and I was like, oh, I knew, they're just telling me what I kind of know. And obviously it's important to be guided by someone with experience, but there is a point where you can almost saturate a bit before you've understood what you already know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just like you don't know what you don't know, but sometimes you don't know what you do know.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
So
So
you're
true.
sitting in you know, I love that. There was a Paulo Coelho quote that I used for a long time when advertising teacher trainings. Um, I'm not here to teach you anything. I'm here to remind you of that which you already know.
Yeah, I love
And I
that.
think that, yeah, and I think that that's certainly the way that I've approached guiding people through teacher training journeys is
Hmm, hmm.
it's very much a dialogue. It's not um, you know, I try to coach the answers out of people because it's like you said, you already know it. And I think that inquiry gets people to reflect on their own lived experience and relationship to the practice and be able to speak from that place of knowing rather than I don't know, can you please tell me?
Mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Totally, yeah. Um, Yeah, that's so true. I think it is. And I felt that when I was taught by you, just being guided. And also, just being able to have things unfold for me thereafter, just because the seeds had been planted, because you set up that open dialogue and almost like a collaborative experience when you're training people. Um, Tell us when your next training is, by the way, because I know I'm going to have a lot of yoga teachers listening and I know they're going to be wondering.
Yeah, so the next one is scheduled at Tri Yoga for June 17th to 23rd, and you'll be joining me.
I'm going to be joining, and I cannot recommend it enough. Anyone who's listening, anyone who's listening who's a teacher, I really recommend it. And I also wanted to ask you, Kristin, again, just changing tack a little bit. Is there anything you do that just brings you a huge sense of joy and ease that's not necessarily like a typical wellness practice? It doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have to be related at all to say like yoga or meditation or anything like that. Is there something that you just wish more people knew about? Just makes you feel happy? I don't know.
I mean, I just love being in the conversation of self-discovery and wonder and I don't know, I think I just engage in life every day and I love to I think it's so easy to just be on autopilot and you know you get up you do your thing in the routine and da, 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 and sometimes you're just this and I've been this in the past like this moving freight train and it's like who's even driving the train here
Mm.
and so whenever I get an opportunity teacher training has is really that for me as well and then this new no muck no lotus
Oh, yes, I
community
wanted to ask
that
you
I've
this.
been um, that
Can
I've
you
been
tell us a little about that quickly?
yeah so um you know I feel like I've really been stepping into this place of like the crone years of my life and
Love
you
that
know
word.
I just as I mentioned I just turned 52 in November and um feel like I've landed in such a good place in my life that I've done years and years and years and years of work and that's never going to end. I'm always going to be engaged in the work but I hear from my community like there's so much dysregulation happening in the world all the uncertainty I feel like there's anxiety depression these things are on the rise
Hmm.
and so every day I engage in practices that help me feel grounded help me remember what's important who am I why am I here what is my purpose in the world and I wanted to call a community of women together to because sometimes we don't schedule time to um, to step out of time and to do the practices that remind us of who we actually are, then we're just kind of left to the torrent of we're caught in the tailspin of life, and all that there's
Yeah.
so many demands on our time and attention and focus that we need to say, listen, I'm going to drop in for however many minutes or hours a day to just get grounded and be self-referencing rather than depending on the world out there to tell me who I am. So I've created this series called No Muck, No Lotus. And it's really about digging into some of the subjects that have been really relevant for me over the last couple decades. So we're talking about, what do you truly want? Oftentimes, when I've been asked, what do you want? I'm like, I don't even know because I haven't taken the time to really ask that question.
Mm.
So getting clear on like, what do you actually want? Not based on your conditioning or what you think you're supposed to want, but like, what do you actually want? And so we really dig into that, like wants, desires, are they even true? Let's look at how we've been conditioned. Are you operating by these outmoded belief systems and structures? Let's like test our beliefs because they might not even, sometimes we're not getting what we want because we're operating in this outmoded way of being.
Mm.
And so we're looking at values, we're looking at boundary work, what boundaries need to be in place so that we can have what we want.
Mm.
Um, Scheduling this time to really show up for yourself.
Mhm.
Um, we're looking at aging, intimacy, sexuality, sensuality. What's your relationship to pleasure, to your body?
Mm.
Um, can you sit in discomfort and not have to act like when something's being requested of you? Um, what else? We're looking at we're looking at money, but also reframing money into like money's a currency of wealth, but so is your time, so
Mm.
is your so is self-love, so is your health. Um, yeah,
That
who you
sounds
choose to spend time
amazing.
with is wealth. Yeah, so it just keeps, so I'm just coming to the last couple weeks of my first cohort, and I'm starting a whole new series March 1st that's going to be 12 sessions where I introduce a theme one week. The following week it's more question and answer, integration work,
Mhm.
mentoring, and then we go into a new theme.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And is that online? Can people join from different
yeah,
countries? That's awesome.
yes, it's online. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
I'm gonna pop a link to that in the show notes because I know
Oh, thank
that's gonna
you.
sound really, really, I know that'll be very, very appealing to a lot of people right
Yeah.
now.
And that
Um,
was kind of borne out. I will just say that, as I mentioned, this water kefir business, Sabrina and I bootstrapped it from ground level, and it's 7.5 years in. And when you're an entrepreneur, you have this creative idea, and then which is very like it takes this much time to have a creative idea, and then you spend the rest of the time. Um, for us, we're like kind of warehouse workers,
yeah.
and I feel like there's been and in COVID, I went full bore into it and reduced my teaching schedule, like a lot of people did. And then I've kind of forgot who I was and what really brings me joy. And so I was reflecting on, well, what do I love so much about teaching? And it's being in the conversation. It helps me when I'm surrounded by a community of people that want the same things. It helps me be more aligned in like what's important to me. So that's kind of where that has come from. And it just brings me so much delight and joy to be in the conversation and to see other women going like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Because oftentimes we feel like we're alone in this. And I
Mhm.
think that one of the key ways that of nervous system regulation is to be with people.
Co-regulation, right?
Co-regulation, exactly, and to tend and befriend together our pain points in our life, and yeah, support each other, raise
Yeah,
each other up.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, Kristen. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and also all the cool things you have on offer. And I've really, really enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Thanks for the invitation.